ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the founder of the Dubuque Group, Mr. Ben Morrison. Thanks, Ben. Have fun.
Thank you. Is my fly okay? All right. April 21st, 1992. It was a rainy day, not much unlike the weather yesterday if you were here in town. And I was coming up the elevator in the building that I worked in on my first job, and I had a cup of coffee in my hand. And I remember the smell of that coffee. It smelled like hazelnut. And I hate that smell as much as I hated my job at that time. I don't know if anybody likes hazelnut in their coffee. I don't want to offend you. As I came out of that elevator, I was heading to my workstation. It was slides back then, not PowerPoint like we have here today. And I was working on a presentation for the vice president of a global food company, and I realized I had made the biggest mistake of my young life. I was 21 years old. The presentation that I was working on was more about him and the company, big words, big flash, than it was about the audience. And that did not sit right with me. It actually also made me feel a little bit sick. This is about the first paradox that I had to face in my early life, where I realized I wasn't following my heart. And it set me about on this quest in life to focus on things like engagement and to find ways to actually change the needle back. Because I went to school to become a filmmaker because I knew that film had the power to move people, to move audiences like yourself, to move me on an emotional level. And that's what I really set out to do. I learned through taking a little bit of control at the time, because there was only so much I can do being a young event designer. And I would start to move that needle any which way that I possibly could. I realized very early on that emotion was the driver of influence. And this stuck with me very, very deeply. So try selling that to the executives of the day, like this vice president that I was working with. It was next to impossible, so I had to look to qualify this somehow if I was to stay in this industry. Now, I went on to work for that company and a couple of others for a few years, and I saw the same patterns over and over again, continuing this cycle. And you know what? That made me feel sick too. So I had to do something about it. In 1997, I walked out and started my own company. Yes, I have not changed at all. And this is supposed to be a stressful business, right? I don't know what's going on. But that allowed me the opportunity to experiment, to test new theories, to try things on audiences, many times without their permission or without the client's permission, and I would watch to see the results of what was happening. And it also made me realize that I was able to bring things that I wanted to achieve in film to the events space. And that primarily was about putting audiences back at the center of everything that we do. So for the past 20 years, that journey of discovery led me to find solutions more to impact the return on investment, the really, really challenging return on investment by the use of neuroscience and psychology. And at the same time, we had to seek better ways to measure the results of what we were doing. Our team now of researchers and what we like to call event scientists continually push for ways to connect with audiences, to connect on the front end, to influence and impact and move up engagement in this cumulative effect. But science is about cause and effect. So we have to find better ways, if we're impacting the cause, to measure the effect. It's a cycle in science. So today what I'm going to do is share with you three things. First, why measurement in event and experience design is so challenged. Second, what we can do with science to help turn that around. And third, how we can measure what really matters in the future of event design. And maybe this will change the way you think a little bit as you move forward on your next experiences that you are impacting, and just give you a little bit more power as this wonderful superhero event designer. Engineering successful events is complex. We can all agree with that. Events that meet our expectations, our clients' expectations, and our audience expectations. Measuring live events is even more elusive. And you've heard some examples this morning of how some people go about this as well, the likes of Microsoft. In many cases, to measure ROI, I would argue that that is next to impossible. But done right, events have extraordinary ability to achieve objectives and to move people. But most events are designed by nothing more than intuition and guesswork. What we think will move an audience. What we assume will connect with them. And many times what we think worked in the past, and we repeat that over and over again. Now, despite throwing wonderful creative at events, this number may shock you. Our research team went on to analyze dozens and dozens of experiences from clients, not just our own, and tried to align traditional markers that we hope to use as forms of measurement. Things like retention 2 weeks after the fact, focus, and maintaining attention over certain duration during live events. Some things that are pretty challenging to measure. And we came up with this number that most traditional events may be as bad as 30% return on investment. That royally sucks. It's dismal. But that means what? There's an amazing opportunity for us to impact, to make changes. And we can do things better. But how do we manage what we cannot measure? So this is the dilemma that we face, particularly when we look at things from the perspective of science. There are many ways to measure events. You heard some examples from Bob about how Microsoft goes about measuring it. And what works for them. There's social media, like analytics. There's meeting objectives that have been set out. There's coming in under budget. Sometimes that's what a client will use to say, well, this was a success, came in under budget. And there's other established measurement protocols that companies use, but are they all effective for measuring what really matters, for measuring how movement is happening within a member of the audience? And we've found that despite all these tools, the most current forms of measurement in our industry are surveys. Can we all agree on that? So let's focus on this for a moment, because I'd like to ask, raise your hand if you've conducted or been involved in a post-event survey. So there's a pretty good cross-section of you. So we're going to take a little survey of our own right now. If you want to pull out your application, I'm just going to do a little poll, so be very quick. But we can't talk about surveys and not survey. So the question is, what forms of measurement have you used over the past 3 years? Now that question was designed, by the way, by our psychology team. We'll talk more about that in a moment. So if we can cue over to the survey, or the poll, and select all that apply. Should really have music. And you don't want that. I'm on Toronto time zone right now. All right, so 38 votes. How many votes do you want? Has everybody locked in your votes? Yep, okay, so if we can see the results, pre-on-site post. Well, this is actually very expected and good answers. Good answers, you did well. This is what we traditionally see in the industry, so it really qualifies that measurement happens after the fact. If we can return to the slides, please. So think about it. Think about those surveys that you've been involved in. What did you do with the data that you collected? How did that impact future experience, your next event? Did it? These are questions for you to ask yourself. Were they standardized if you worked on more than one, year after year, so you could compare the data? What if I told you that 95% of you likely wasted your time due to the inherent and multiple issues of feedback design from the perspective of psychology and neuroscience? In events, we tend to gravitate towards surveys, but as event scientists and researchers, we know there are just too many inherent flaws baked into that design and process to give us valuable, usable insight beyond just wonderful opinions. And there's a saying in science that, tell me the answer you want and we'll create a survey to get you that answer. The list of challenges with surveys is so long, I couldn't fit them all on a slide. And I'm not going to, but I will talk about it anytime if you want to come and talk. But things such as lousy question design that open up a magnitude of biases, open-ended questions that contribute to cognitive fatigue and information responses that are very hard to analyze as a planner or to evaluate. Agreeable questions, too many agree, disagree. Do you know 10% of us will agree just for the sake of agreeing? Don't know answers. When you have a don't know on a survey, it's a way out. You're getting a completely unusable response. Reaching the right people with sample pool. This is the biggest challenge that we face in event measurement. And I'll give you an example, because the most chronic issue that we have with event surveys, particularly post-event surveys, is what we call self-selection. What is self-selection? Imagine you walk into a restaurant you love. 3 things play out. First, you have a horrible experience. You get the wrong meal. Maybe there's a hair in it. Second, it's average. It's what you were expecting, met your expectations. Third, it was above average. You maybe got a free dessert or a cocktail. Now, if you were handed a survey, which would you choose to respond, or which would provoke you to respond to that survey? Not the one with the drink for me. I would take, the which? Yeah, you would take having the bad experience, and that's self-selecting. I selected to do that. This is why we lose a vast majority of valuable data in event research. So that is one of only many challenges. So surveys, in my opinion, scientifically speaking, suck. But they're still necessary, and we can still use them to get really, really good insight. How can we do better? I'm going to provide a link at the end of the presentation where there's a lot of information that we can share that can dramatically improve and educate you on how to just go about measuring immediately. But I want to tell you a story of one customer. 2 years ago, we received an email from the COO of a global pharma company while he was sitting in a Congress meeting, a global Congress symposium in Vienna. And he wrote to me saying, why is it that we invest so much money in these experiences? We have wonderful content, excellent speakers, they're very well managed, but 50% of the people sitting in this room are tuned out, they're looking at other things on their iPad. That's a whole other story, by the way, on science of engagement. And they're very hard for us to attract the customers that we want to attract to our event. We have to change this. We want to transform the way these events are done because they're formulaic. We all do the same ones. It doesn't matter what the competition is doing, they're all the same. How can we create a program where our customers will be more top of mind and want to attend our events? Well, to do this, and of course we said, no problem. To do this, we need to understand the minds of your customers better than anybody else. So this would create a better match between the customer's expectations and the company's objectives. And that's where measurement protocols can fit in. Watch this video.
Imagine what we were going to do with this space. We actually asked our customers through a variety of different surveys what they wanted to have happen out of Congress. So those insights really drove us to the creative brief and hence the construction of the site that we have here at ASCO. So we worked with a company called Dubuque that helped us to understand the science behind creating an environment where education can flow a little bit more freely because of the environment that you're sitting in.
They really helped us understand the neuroscience behind humans and what makes them comfortable and more productive.
The value of developing a space like this and really reimagining what this can do is that enhanced HCP experience, or the healthcare provider experience while we're at a Congress, and really having them have a positive memory of BMS and what we afforded them while they were at a Congress.
I can tell you the response has been amazing.
The feedback has been really incredible. We've had some surveys that we're conducting right here within this space, and the responses that we've gotten from both healthcare providers and our Bristol-Myers Squibb employees are 100% of them felt that this was conducive for them to have the educational discussions that we were hoping to aim for, which exceeded my expectations. So I couldn't be more happy.
Now, this was the first phase of what would become a multi-phase approach. And it's important just to note, transformation takes time, especially on this scale. But that was pretty positive feedback. So how do we achieve this result? Within this first phase, scientifically, for the process, we needed to understand and anticipate changes in the minds, the emotions, and the perceptions of this target audience, healthcare professionals in this case. There is no single approach for how you go about measuring this. And this is going to be really one of the key themes from this discussion today, and one of the biggest takeaways that I have to share with you, my co-conspirators. With neuroscaping, we map experiences throughout the whole experience, and we find touch points to inject science and research in order to elevate engagement. Measuring should be no different. It's about that arc as well. In engagement, we have to combat, though, many psychological challenges. And I mentioned all of these challenges that are inherent just in survey design, but there is so much more that we have to navigate around. And with this client, that was essential because we needed to map the whole process. Let me give you an example of how brain science actually has to be factored into the equation when you are speaking with people like I am right now. How many of you have mind wandered during the presentation so far this morning? Or how many of you are brave enough to actually admit it? And that's okay, I'm mind wandering right now. And now I'm back. And those of you who haven't raised your hands, 30% of the time you will mind wander unintentionally. So these are things that we have to combat in event design all the time. And again, that's just one of many things. And face it, surveys are boring, don't you think? I know I don't like surveys. They're extraordinarily boring, and we have to deal with so many cognitive biases throughout that process. So how are we going to get past all of that when we were going about collecting the insights we needed to transform this event? So just like live events, we have to fight against things like focus, attention, cognitive overload, and the list goes on. We have to think of those things when we design experiences, surveys as experiences. We can't eliminate them completely, but we can engineer around them. There is so much competition at the gateway to the mind. Bob touched on it this morning. Everybody has the world in their pockets, on their cell phones. And whether you're sitting in a live event or sitting at home filling out a survey, that's going to be a distraction, even if it's only in your pocket. Research shows that that will take your mind if you just feel that buzz. So for this client, we needed to bake this into the whole design process of this event. The full spectrum, as we call it, full spectrum measurement. It's not just post-survey where you're getting information after the fact. A lot of memories have already changed, and even memories will change when colleagues talk to one another. So we bypass many of these challenges by creating a full spectrum measurement plan, because engagement is a journey for participants. Measurement needs to be a journey as well, and we need to manage it. It needs to be a journey because measurement needs to be authentic. Here, what we call upstream and downstream. We measure before the event. How can you create a transformative event or change an event from one year to the other if you're not actually taking measurement before? Then throughout the engagement arc, finding touch points to gather feedback. It can be in focus groups, interviews, more select sample pools that will give you higher quality insights. you need to start engineering this into your event design so that you can actually make really, really big difference down the road. Applying insights, and the cycle begins again at the end of it. So measurement and engagement are a cycle that work together. This gave us, by approaching it this way, gave us wonderful insights in order to create and shape this future event. Because it was about understanding the journey of the participants, those who we want to move, which allows us to do so much more and to target them with precision. So we got this far with just this case, and this is a continuing process, but we can do so much more. How can we do more? We have to understand. So how can we measure what matters from the perspective of the participant? Yes, my hand is on my heart. 2 American researchers published a paper in the journal Cognition and Emotion. This is a very well-respected scientific journal. And they said, from an intuitive layperson's perspective, it should be easy to determine whether somebody is experiencing a particular emotion. However, scientific evidence suggests that measuring a person's emotional state is one of the most vexing problems in effective science. They really do have a point. I'd like to ask you something for a moment. Humor me on this. Please take a moment and put your hand on your heart. Focus on the feeling. Feel your heart. I'm going to be quiet for a moment. Truly focus on what you feel, whether it's rhythm, tempo, whatever. And if you're not feeling anything, there's a doctor around the corner. Now, I'm going to ask you one more thing. Keep your hand on your heart and silently turn to a person beside you and look them directly in the eyes and focus on what you're feeling. Come on, don't be shy. Turn to the person beside you. You might not even need to, and you'll be experiencing some feelings right now. Focus on what you're feeling. Really, truly focus on it for a moment. And if you don't have somebody beside you, just imagine that they're beside you. It will still have the same effect from the perspective of science. And think about what you're feeling. Maybe you're falling in love. To know. All right, you can return. We know that emotion is such a significant factor in event design. We all know this in this room. And remember, except for that vice president in 1992, I think we all know very well now. How do you measure it? We look at emotion and how it manifests, and then we try to measure that. We're continually trying to find ways to impact engagement on the front end and to get past these barriers of engagement like distraction, things I mentioned, and ultimately affect what is called arousal levels. And I mean that arousal levels, by the way, in the scientific sense. For an audience in an experience, it is about managing arousal levels throughout an experience, an event. This is a careful dance because as humans, we seek a balanced level of arousal naturally. But in event design, we want to effect that responsibly because managing arousal levels well can actually enhance retention. It can enhance focus. It can affect a lot of positive things. And mismanaged, it can have a catastrophic effect and actually do everything to make reaching your objectives very difficult. It can even damage a relationship between a participant and the organization hosting the event if it is not managed well. So what are arousal levels technically? You can measure arousal levels on an excitement scale, say as a 9 out of 10. Some of you might be feeling that. You can measure heart rate and other biometric feedback. Our researchers, any one of these we can actually challenge the accuracy of, so it's really about managing things on a greater scale. But let's think through a different lens. We all love movies, right? I think we can agree we all love movies. Those play with our emotions like no other medium does. There are ups and downs. Great movies are designed as an emotional journey. Moods change as storylines evolve. They expose us to a full palette of emotion. They, when curated well, do wonderfully thoughtful things for us. This is actually, this is an important example for me because it takes me back to my intended roots as a filmmaker and what we apply to events. There has to be balance, though, because bigger is not better. What can happen is we can hit fatigue. Anybody who watched a Michael Bay Transformers movie will know what I mean by arousal fatigue, where you just start to tune out because there is so much excitement. So events need to be approached in the same way. Mismanaging, as I mentioned, can be catastrophic. So that is something that we have to constantly navigate around. The magic is really knowing how to manage the audience's stimulation. So, if events are about curating emotion and managing arousal levels, how do we measure that? This is being the most challenging question. Technology is beginning to fill the gaps, fortunately. And these are exciting times for that. Imagine collecting insights from an audience, insights that actually matter during a live experience, when the audience doesn't even know. And I'm not talking about fraudulently collecting. I'm just saying it just happens to be a byproduct of what we're doing. In the future, we will be able to adjust events on the fly. We can do this now already. We can adjust to the cognitive states of audiences, to the emotional states. We can actually watch arousal levels and balance the flow of engagement and improve return on investment. Actually, quite easily. Here's an example of an experience, an event where audience, this was from a company that was called Lightwave, that was attached biometric sensor feedback to audiences that measured things like energy level, heart rates, motion, and then streamed that information to a world-class DJ so that he could adjust on the fly based on how the audience was experiencing his playlists. That's just one example, and that's more for the entertainment side. It's exciting in this time as neuro event designers, as we like to call ourselves. The vision ultimately is to blur the line between measurement and experience, where audiences do not actually have to participate in measurement, where we're going to experience all of those biases and challenges that I talked about before, where they're just actually experiencing the event and we're collecting data that is like no other, where they're connected in a more meaningful way to the experience, where we're actually adding to engagement, not taking away from it because we have to go and ask them some interview questions or poll them, and where we can capture things like energy, movement, excitement, and again, as I mentioned, arousal levels, which contribute greatly to engagement. Doing things like creating active art, maybe having the audiences interacting with the environment, with lighting, with sound, with other forms of experience, so that they actually are connected with purpose and want to be connected. Now, combined with other forms of measurement, because I mentioned surveys are invaluable if done right, this gives us profiles for future event design that we never thought were possible. But you have to ask yourself, is it worth it? Is it worth the investment? Because technology costs. And if this, as I mentioned, is baked into the engagement experience as an element of the event, then I would say, damn right, absolutely, is it worth it? Because now it's serving two purposes. We just closed the loop between engagement and measurement. And that's going to give us wonders. Surveys will continue to evolve. And in the future, they'll be unrecognizable from their current form. Data will be collected in new and more meaningful ways, as I've just shown you. And what we felt with our hands, if you want to put your hand back on your heart, this is where the power lies. This is where we can actually capture the most insightful measurement of experience designs. We just have to tap it. We have this innate understanding, everybody in this room, of the power of how emotion plays out in our events. Emotion captured by science is able to transform the future of this industry. And anyone in this room can be a co-conspirator with me and be a wonderful event scientist. Together, we can transform this industry because this is where it's going. Thank you very much. There's a link for any further details as well.